Today, for his second appearance on Coastal Front, we welcome Lon LaClaire, General Manager of Engineering Services at the City of Vancouver. Lon has been with the city for more than 25 years, starting as a transportation engineer in 1997. You were probably about 12 years old, I think, Lon.
31.
He holds a bachelor's degree in engineering from Concordia University and a master's in engineering with a focus on transportation and structures from the University of Calgary. Today, we're going to cover important infrastructure challenges facing the city today, including road maintenance, sewer upgrades, electrification, and we're going to spend some time talking about business improvement associations. Lon, thanks for being on with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Great. Before we start, this podcast is going to be a little different than our previous ones because I'm going to start by taking just a minute or two to provide some context to what we're going to talk about today by providing the listeners and viewers with some idea about what engineering means within the city, detailing kind of the numbers around it. So to start with, the umbrella of engineering services, and I pulled this right off the City of Vancouver's website, is to plan, build, and maintain public structures. And I'm going to strip down that there's a long list that it includes, but the ones that I highlighted include maintaining our streets and sidewalks, overseeing transportation, managing our water and sewer, and picking up our garbage, compost, and recycling. To provide some further insight, I want to also let the listeners and viewers understand what the dollar amounts around this entail. The 2024 operating budget that was approved last year by Council was $2.2 billion. And the spending was allocated, and I'll just highlight a few of them. One of them was utilities, which is 22%. Police was 20%. Fire was 9%. Parks and Recreation was 8%. Engineering and Public Works was 6%. And engineering makes up 28% of the total operating expenditures. So that's the operating budget. And Lon, to make sure in layman's terms, operating budget means basically the budget you have to work with for this coming year, right? Like how you spend your money for just to keep the city running.
It's kind of like wages and the utility fees and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah. Okay, perfect. And then second to that is what is referred to as the capital budget. These are kind of like big, longer, multi-year infrastructure spends. Have I got that?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So the City of Vancouver's capital budget prioritized the delivery of $1.25 billion of previously approved multi-year capital projects, and they added another $368 million being committed for 2024. So I want the listeners and viewers to understand that these are big numbers here. We're not talking about pocket change. And the allocation of that budget included water, sewers, and drainage, which come under your portfolio, is $139 million, 38%. Streets is another $73 million, 20% of that overall budget. Waste collection, diversion, and disposal is $11 million. Civic facilities and equipment is $10 million. And that the engineering total, by my math, came to over $233 million of that budget, or about 64%. Am I kind of on my numbers?
Sounds about right.
Okay. So the bottom line is, folks, Lon is responsible for a large amount of your property taxes that you pay every year, and so that's what we're going to get into. So before we go into these 4 different subjects of sewer, road maintenance, electrification, and business improvement associations, I'd like to start by passing the mic over to you and have you maybe take a moment to explain to us what your title of General Manager of Engineering Services at the City of Vancouver means to the average listener that may not be so plugged into this.
Sure. Yeah. So, I'm responsible for all those areas that you mentioned. And each of those are a division within the engineering department: water, sewer, streets, transportation, sanitation, solid waste. What I would add that's kind of not in that list is that we also manage the only landfill in the region, so the Vancouver landfill, which is located in Delta. We used to just use it for City of Vancouver waste, but now we accept waste from the entire region, which is, of course, going to mean that it's going to reach its ultimate fill capacity sooner. But we're kind of happy to provide that service. In addition to that, the city also, or the engineering department, is also responsible for the entire fleet and equipment services for across all departments. And so that ends up being a big task in itself, because the engineering department, of course, has lots of trucks and, heavy equipment that, does the construction. But then we also take care of police vehicles, fire trucks and all of that. And then the other area that we also do is we manage the neighborhood energy utility, which is a district energy system, that serves Olympic Village and Mount Pleasant Industrial and a few areas like that. So that's kind of the full area. One thing I would just clarify in terms of the actual source of funds for engineering, this is an important distinction. It's a big budget, but the actual portion that's paid for by tax is actually quite small.
Oh, I see.
So because water and sewer are paid through utility fees, so you don't pay for water unless you use water. And if you use water, you get charged a rate, and you kind of get a bill, and that pays for the entire water system.
Okay.
Same with sewer system. So we as a surrogate, we actually think that every time you use water, for all the water that you're not drinking, is actually going right into the sewer.
Okay.
So usually you're washing clothes or something like that. So we actually use the water rate to kind of estimate what the sewer consumption is, and that's also a bill. For the neighborhood energy system, of course, it's paid for by the users.
Right.
It's like there's no kind of cross support either from city taxes or to city taxes.
Yeah.
It's neither direction. In fact, BC Utilities Company Commission wouldn't allow that.
Uh-huh.
And then, say, for the landfill, we do tipping fees and things like that.
Yeah.
So a huge portion of the only part that's really tax supported is the streets.
Okay. Okay, that's interesting.
Which makes it exposed and vulnerable.
Yeah.
Because if I see that we need more money to maintain the water system, we adjust the water rates.
Yeah.
Same with sewer system, same with the landfill.
And how much control do you have over the water rates?
We adjust them every year.
But what I mean by that, is there a separate commission that gets to decide how much range you can change?
It's a council decision. So we write reports, and it's a little bit, some of it's a little bit out of our control because we purchase water from Metro Vancouver.
Right, okay.
And so that's a big bill. They have the 3 reservoirs that supply water to the city of Vancouver on their trunks, their water trunks, and then we distribute it. So we do have to pass on some of the fees that we have to pay to Metro. It's the same with the sewer system.
Gotcha.
So we kind of take what our charges are, and then we look at what our own city needs are, and then we kind of establish a rate.
Okay. Now, a certain amount of water consumption, though, would be public use, watering plants, Kitsilano Pool, public pools.
Yeah.
How much of that water consumption accounts for the city's consumption? It must be a pretty small number, I imagine.
It is, and in the past, the city hasn't charged itself for water, but we are transitioning to full charge everywhere.
Okay.
So,
so historically, then, who pays for that?
Well, that would come out of city taxes.
Oh, I see.
Just so
okay.
Park Board has so much money, you could say if we've been giving them water for free to water the grass and fill the fountains and stuff like that, and we start to charge them, of course, that's going to change the way that we are going to have to charge for tax.
Yeah. So, Lon, since we last spoke, we've now had Mayor Ken Sim and his council, majority council, in place for 2 years now. Obviously, their objectives can vary from previous ones and future ones. How has this current mayor and council influenced the direction that engineering division is focusing their efforts today?
Well, they're very concerned about the infrastructure renewal piece, which is good. We've been trying to increase raise property taxes by 1% a year to specifically target it at infrastructure deficit. So they've continued to support that. Where I see a new support is actually in the areas of streets and the areas of engineering that are tax funded. And just recently at the midterm capital plan update, they directed more money towards those. When a new council comes into power, we will have had a referendum on the capital plan as part of the election. So in a sense, you're kind of dealing with what the last council put on the ballot, and you're inheriting that, right, to some extent.
Okay.
And so your ability to kind of move money around or raise more money through capital or whatever is kind of somewhat limited. So at the midterm capital plan update, we kind of had this opportunity to say, well, actually, this project isn't proceeding, this one's not proceeding. So they had an opportunity to say, okay, well then let's spend that money on this thing over here instead.
Okay.
And they kind of increased our funding for new sidewalks, sidewalk renewal for local streets, for arterial streets, and that's been a big shift for engineering to see that.
Yeah, great. Well, we're going to get into that because it's one of my personal interests is streets. But let's talk about sewage first, because I know it's on everybody's mind every day, and it's such a sexy topic to talk about. So sewage management is obviously a crucial part of the city's infrastructure. Can you give us a bit of a behind-the-scenes view of what the city of Vancouver's sewer system looks like today?
Yeah. So when the city was created, and this is a relatively young city in the scheme of things. If you look at, Montreal is like almost 400 years old.
Right.
Vancouver's just over 100, 120 something or whatever that is. And when they first started building the sewer system as what they call a combined sewer system, which takes rainwater and sanitary flows into the same pipe and directs those to the treatment plant. And so that's what we've inherited. These days, that's a system that creates a problem for us.
Okay.
And for two reasons. One is that, of course, as we grow, the need for more sewer capacity is there. That's on the sanitary side. But the more significant impact is that the stormwater. Rainfall intensity has increased quite dramatically with climate change, and it's forecast to increase another 30% or something like that in the coming decade or two. This is taking away all of our sewer capacity, just because these intense rainfall events can fill the sewers and create backups. And so the solution to that is to separate the stormwater from the sanitary. And so that started happening in this city in the 60s. So if you look at the city, they had gone so far, if you think of a geographic map, the newest portions of the city down in the southeast, in the south, and the very far east have a separated system. Because they
so what neighborhoods are we talking about? Like
Killarney and
Marpole and
yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah. Actually, Marpole's not. Marpole's an old neighborhood. Yeah.
But Killarney
and the kind of Sunset area, even as far as Nanaimo.
Okay.
So almost Nanaimo. In fact, the Nanaimo station is actually an indicator of a real failed system, just because that's the last area that we did combined sewer pipes.
Oh, okay.
And the sewer capacity is the challenge with densification of that area.
Right. Yeah, there's been a lot there.
We have like almost no towers or development around the Nanaimo station area, and one of the big reasons for that is that the sewer capacity is so limited.
Really?
We have regular flooding in the neighborhood right now. We can't make it worse. We have to find a solution. Wow. So the other piece is, like, now that we're over 100, each sewer pipe has a 100-year lifespan. So it comes time for renewal.
Yeah.
And the oldest sections, like downtown and the inner city part, it's all separated now because it reached its expiry date, and we put in two pipes instead of one, so we have a separated system. So we have this mixed system across the city, which is a bit of a challenge.
That must be really challenging to manage.
It's about half separated, but a lot of the parts that are separated are only separated for a bit, and then they combine.
Oh, really?
So it actually doesn't solve the problem. One day it will. Like once we get separation all the way to the receiving body, which is the Fraser River, False Creek, or Burrard Inlet.
I see.
But yeah, so it's...
So to kind of really dumb this down, let's say we magically get to a separated system somewhere in our lifetime in the future. What happens? Like if it's raining outside and I go to the toilet and I flush the toilet and there's water draining down the drain on the outside of my home, but there's also water draining from the inside of my home. Where do those bodies of water?
They go to two different systems.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's the way the rest of the region, all municipalities except for.
And what's the benefit of that? I'm sorry if it's just asking.
The benefit of it is that the sanitary system doesn't become overwhelmed.
Okay.
By rainfall.
Okay.
And so
does the rainfall kind of just travel along untreated and goes straight into our bodies of water, like False Creek and Fraser River and whatnot?
That's correct.
I see.
And in many respects, that creates a new challenge. So like the notion of the separated system that was kind of starting in the 70s or whatever, and in Burnaby, New Westminster, or Surrey and all that, not New Westminster. New Westminster's old, like Vancouver.
Yeah.
So they have the same issues with a combined system transitioning to two. But the one issue with that is that does mean that rainwater untreated goes straight to the receiving body, and often this water is not clean.
I was going to say.
The thought was that it's running off your roof or coming down the downspout or whatever. It's going to be clean. But the road runoff in particular is not clean, especially after an extended non-rain period.
Yeah.
So in the summer, you get a lot of buildup of oil and grit and materials from vehicles. And that first rainfall is very dirty.
Yeah.
And that would go, right now, that goes generally to Iona for treatment.
Okay.
In the future, in the separated
But that's
system,
a good thing, is it not, right now?
It is.
Okay.
So this is the weird thing, is that now...
Because I was, as a reflection of that, up on sort of 4th and Blanca, heading towards UBC, there's a whole new set of asphalt being paved on the UBC side. But those trucks are driving back along Blanca and 4th, and I'm noticing, there's just this black streaks, and it hasn't rained in and basically it's barely rained in the last couple of weeks, which is unusual in Vancouver. And I'm thinking to myself, man, when the rain hits and that starts to flow, that's all going to go into our water systems.
That's right.
And so if we had a segregated system, and I don't know if West Point Grey does or not, does that? It's all combined?
Yeah.
Okay, so that would actually go to Iona and get treated.
Yes.
But in a separated
future,
system,
it would go straight to the beaches.
Right, which would not be very good.
It would not be very good.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So then what do you do there?
So there's the other piece. That's the other challenge about this incredibly gigantic, expensive system, which, by the way, is like, in terms of its assets in the city, is like $11 billion worth of assets.
Wow.
It's really deep. It's really hard to replace. It's really hard to change. Very expensive and very disruptive.
Yeah.
Every time we're doing a sewer project. But so addressing that issue, which is that separation doesn't solve the pollution problem.
Right.
Like it actually it changes the problem.
Yeah.
Right. It makes it a different problem. So we don't have sanitary flow, because right now in this extreme rainfall events we have combined sewer overflows.
Yeah.
So CSOs, that's what they're called. And those are a mix of storm and sanitary, which make its way straight into the ocean untreated.
Right.
Because our pipes have.
I remember John
maxed out.
Coupard telling me about this years ago when I was having a chat with him. One of his concerns was exactly what you just described, is that people don't realize we have untreated sewage going straight into our waters. It
happens during heavy rain events, which typically in our city are the winter.
Right.
And what's interesting about that is that's usually when people aren't at the beaches. So that's actually not that big of a problem. But if we do the separation system, suddenly we're sending, untreated stormwater, which is running across roads, to the beaches. So the other piece that we're trying to do is deal with that. And so with stormwater, through completely different systems, we're trying to capture it and clean it. So an example downtown just recently, Richard Street Bikeway. I don't know if you've seen that separated bike path.
Yeah.
It's separated by the cars with a row of trees. And those catch basins, like the drainage, goes into this extended tree pit for the entire length of Richard Street. And that water, of course, makes its way through all of this organic material and actually gets cleaned.
Oh, wow.
So then when it goes out, it's clean. So water running off of Richard Street's not contributing to the problem.
Well, that's a creative way to
But this is a new thing for us. So green infrastructure, using road runoff. We have a couple big projects around the Cambie area, Columbia Park, where we're working with the park board to direct stormwater into kind of like modern ditches, if you want to call it that. But they look nice. Often you can do a really nice job of it. And then into a retention tank or to a pond. So that then when it finally makes its way to the river, it's clean.
It's clean.
Yeah.
Wow, that's creative. That is really creative. Yeah. Lon, I've got a lot of listeners that are friends of mine who live in the Dunbar area, and there's a I would assume it's sewage. There's these huge pipes that are sitting on the side of the road. There's the big holes being dug up, and it's in the Dunbar area. Is this a sewage replacement
It is. It's
Okay.
sewer renewal.
Sewer renewal.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so when we're doing that renewal, we're putting in 2 pipes. We're taking out the old pipe and putting in 2 pipes. So yeah, I've been down to kind of watch the work of the crews there. It's disruptive, right? Again, these are big pipes.
But this should last 100 years, like you said.
They
It's
will.
disruptive now, but I mean, if we could put a context of 100 years, it's not that disruptive.
No, it's not. And on the plus side, when sewers replaces a street, they do so much disruption that they repave the street.
Yeah, you get a brand new street.
You get a brand new street.
Yeah.
And actually, that's a big benefit to our streets department, which doesn't have much money to do street renewal.
Right.
So most of our street renewal
so maybe
is
what I
actually
should be-
happening through sewer replacement.
So I've been, as you know, I've been advocating. I want to see my street around my neighborhood get fixed. It's terrible. Like it's just been a patch job for the last 25 years. So maybe what I should do is switch from asking about my street getting fixed to get my sewage fixed, and
That's
then I
right.
get a free street, a new street. These pipes are enormous.
Yeah.
Like it looks like you'd almost stand inside these things. Is that
Oh yeah.
is that sewage pipes, or is that rainwater, or are they both? Or
Well, in the combined system, it's just a big pipe because it's carrying both. When we separate, the sanitary pipe is quite a bit smaller.
it is.
But the storm pipe is still going to be very big.
Okay.
And recognize that, when the city was developed way back in, 100 years ago, they decided to get rid of all the creeks, right? So there are really no creeks. There's a handful, Tatlow and Musqueam and Still Creek. But by and large, all of our drainage goes into pipes.
Okay.
And so these pipes, by necessity, are very large.
Very large.
Yeah. The biggest ones you could drive a truck through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. But so they look like that size. That's amazing. So, Lon, I know when we talked about this previously, about the sewage challenge that the city's facing, and that we're at that replacement stage, and we're past the replacement stage in many parts of the city. If you were to kind of pin down a date at which these are somewhat, is this just an ongoing forever issue, or are we getting ahead of this, or are we getting further behind? Where are we at with this
I
replacement?
feel like we're totally getting ahead. And in fact, on the water side, I would say we're there. I mean, now, the interesting thing is that when you are a city that's about 100 years old or whatever, it's kind of the first time you get into renewal.
Right,
when you're a
point.
young city, the first 100 years, you're just building new. That's all you're doing, building new. Nice and simple. But then you have to get into the renewal business, and that's a ramp up. Right,
that's a really good perspective.
And so then for water, we've done that. And what's the correct ramp-up rate? Well, you really want to replace about 1% a year, right?
Sure.
If these pipes are going to last 100
Simple
years,
math,
that's a steady state,
Yeah.
right? If you can get to that state, there's no emergency
And are we
anymore.
at 1% a year?
We're at like about 1.1% on the water
to
replacement.
catch up.
So, now, unfortunately, a lot of our system was built in a couple decades.
Okay.
So the
And
50s,
when was that era?
60s, and 70s,
Oh,
when
post-war.
a lot of the city just got built out and most of our suburbs were built. So there's a bulge of assets that are very similar in age.
Okay.
What that does mean, unfortunately, is that over the next maybe 2-3 decades, things will be perceived to be getting worse.
I see.
Because we will have more and more water main breaks, but the path to a sustainable renewal system is there. If you know what I mean, like,
I see.
And then because ideally, if they would have only built 1% of the system a year, then we'd be in great shape.
Right.
But they never did, right?
Yeah.
They built like 30%.
Well, I guess there's a good news, bad news. I mean, the good news is you got a bit of runway here.
Yeah.
Because if most of what the city survives on today is infrastructure built in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and they have a 100-year lifespan, we have a little bit of time, but it almost seems as like you want to get ahead of that now.
You want to plan for this. That's right. And so, and in fact, some of these pipes just crazy good shape after 100 years. Some of them are in terrible shape after 60.
Right.
It really often depends on the manufacturer and stuff like that.
Really?
So we also be very mindful of where we're seeing water main breaks, and we might prioritize a younger pipe just because it's a problem pipe. Over one that is 100 years old, which is just not shown a single, any age. So the sewer system's different, though. We are still ramping up on sewer. So
we're behind on sewer?
We're behind. We're only at this council increased us from about 0.7% to 0.9%. replacement rate. We really need to get to the 1.1 or 1.2.
Okay.
We could probably do that in the next capital plan.
Okay.
So, that would be 2 or 3 years from now.
Okay.
And for us, just so you know, ramping up that kind of replacement rate is not an easy task.
I would assume
it's not something you can do quickly.
Right. I would assume that upgrading your water systems is going to be a lot easier and less costly and disruptive than sewer. Is that a fair statement?
Very fair. It's so much easier.
Yeah.
Water is only built this far. It uses pressure.
Yeah.
It can go up and down hills.
Yeah.
Sewers relies on gravity.
Right.
So it can only go in one direction. And it needs to be a certain slope, which is not too steep and not too shallow.
Right.
So that it has a good scouring effect and keeps the pipe clean. So
Wow.
Sewers are a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. Well, that's why we picked this as our first topic.
That's right.
So
the last one. People could go listen to that one, right?
Yeah. I have one more question about kind of the sewer water. We obviously live in a seismic environment, and we haven't had a big quake here in Vancouver, earthquake in a long time.
Mm-hmm.
If we were to have a pretty substantial earthquake, how strong are these sewer and water systems underground to be able to sustain something like that?
Well, typically sewers survive earthquakes pretty well.
Do they?
Yeah,
Okay.
it actually being embedded in the ground is a real advantage.
Okay.
So even in the most recent kind of big earthquakes in San Francisco, the BART tunnel, which goes under the bay, was operating within days afterwards. In the meantime, bridges had collapsed and all kinds of surface chaos had happened. Because when it's in the ground, you're kind of moving with it. If you're a structure outside of the ground,
I see.
You're kind of getting forces that you're not. A building is suddenly feeling a cantilever force.
Right.
If you know what I mean, like this. That's not something a building normally experiences. So that's the plus thing. On the water side, because it's pressurized and a little vibration can cause a break, and when you have old pipes, the water system is vulnerable. So that's something that we've always been very concerned about, because usually what happens after an earthquake, not only do you have all the damage of the buildings and everything, you usually have fires to put out.
Right, and you need water.
And you need water. And so in planning for that, in the downtown and the busy built-up areas, Falls Creek, like Central Broadway, Kitsilano, downtown, we have what's called a dedicated fire protection system. So that's it's a parallel water system that is earthquake-proof. So these pipes, and we have 2 pump stations for that, one at Cole Harbor and one at David Lamb Park.
Okay.
So there's a little building with a waterfall there. That's actually a pump station.
Really?
And what it's prepared to do is that it can distribute water to these big blue fire hydrants. They're different than the normal ones. So if you see these big blue ones with the white cap versus the red ones, those are dedicated fire protection system for earthquake.
This is why I love having you come on here. Because my kids, I've been telling them about the purple lights, the street lights. They keep like, Dad, you've already told us this story so many times, but this is a new one for them. Well, so when we see the blue fire hydrants with the white caps, those are the ones that are dedicated
to fire protection.
Okay.
Yeah. So water will be supplied to those. Now, if the water main break that goes under the inlet here, from Capilano breaks, which also could happen, this system is set up to pump seawater.
Oh, I see.
So that's why we have the 2 pump stations at the ocean, by the water. Mm-hmm. So they can just draw salt water in and fill the system so we can put out the fires.
This is smart. Who came up with this idea?
It's a city engineer.
Yeah?
Yeah, smart guy.
How long has it been in place for?
We were planning it right when I started the city, so that would have been 1990.
Oh, so pretty recently.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Thank you, whoever that came up with that is.
I know.
That's creative.
It's nice to know there's a bit of a safety vest there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Lon, let's jump to road maintenance. My favorite topic, or the one I've got a lot of frustration about, as you know, I've called you before about my own neighborhood and these roads just falling apart. Now, when we spoke last off camera, you'd explained to me that part of the reason I'm not seeing the roads in my neighborhood get improved on is just hasn't been money in the budget for that. Mm-hmm. But it sounds like council's recently given you a little bit of money for this. So, and we're going to talk a bit more about a local improvement program that you have. But let's start by just give us, for the listeners to understand, over the last, 5 or 10 years, how this has been a challenge for you, like how you've been constrained by your budget, and how that's maybe now starting to change.
Yeah, and actually I would say it's probably a trend which is probably goes back 20 years.
Is that right?
Yeah. And it's great that we just talked about water and sewer and infrastructure renewal and replacement rate and all of that stuff, which is great science, and it's like it's good asset management planning.
Right.
With the street system, because it's part of the regular tax base, we don't have that. So we don't have a dedicated utility, which is a street utility, right? So I can't just draw on utility rates. And to the same extent, when I say, water fees can only be spent on the water system, and we can't, use tax money to do it, this is all tax money. So the money that pays for road maintenance can be used to build a library or housing or anything. And has that been happening? Money's been diverted? Over the past couple of decades, successive councils have kind of diverted money away from roads. And the thing about roads too, when they're in good shape and you've done a good job of maintaining them, why not? Right? The system looks good. Like all your streets look really great.
Yeah. Sure.
Why are we spending, $100 million a year on renewing streets when they all look great?
Yeah.
Of course, they're not paying attention to the 10 that they can't see that are due for renewal,
right.
which are like in the far-flung corners of the city or whatever. Yeah. And so you can kind of like hold off on street renewal for years and years. And of course, it slowly starts to erode and decay. Yeah. And then you do have a moment where it starts to show. Right.
Well,
and then you have a catch-up period.
I mean, am I the only one saying this, or do you hear this from a lot of people?
Well, clearly from our council, they identified that as an issue. Yeah. And we would identify it as a real issue for sure. Yeah. We would always say,
do you track data on how many calls you get inbound on potholes or broken, sidewalks, or do you
we track all of that through 311 or all of our requests.
But
more importantly, we actually track the condition of the assets. So we
independently, like you guys just go out and do it yourselves?
We do. So we have a way to kind of drive the roads for bumpiness or whatever, and all cities do this. Same with sidewalks. So we are scanning for trip hazards. We have a regular program that annually we look at that.
Okay. And so without politicizing this, which is not what we're trying to do, what does the data tell you? I mean, are the roads getting worse? Have they gotten worse?
Yeah. And of course, our renewal rate on local streets is pretty much non-existent. We're doing a couple kilometers a year in a city with like 1,500 kilometers. So it's not a steady state at all.
Yeah.
You would have, again, in a similar way, if you wanted to compare it to the water sewer system, you'd say, what's the life of pavement on a local street versus an arterial street or kind of a secondary arterial.
Yeah.
A street with a bus on it. Bus routes, the buses are very hard on streets. So a local street can last a lot longer than an arterial street. Arterial street carries trucks and buses and stuff like that. And so it requires a lot more frequent renewal. But you could also say, every 50 years we should go to a local street and renew it, right? Or something like that. Yeah. And we don't really have that.
Well, Lon, why don't we? I mean, it seems logical to me, like that we would treat a street. I mean, we need water, we need sewage to not only function as just citizens and residents in the city, but also for businesses. But we need the roads too. How come we're treating roads differently as though it's a different asset class?
Because if roads were a utility, then it would have the same protections that water and sewer have.
Okay.
Which is that. You couldn't be able to direct that money to,
So this is more of like a governance issue at the most basic level. Like we need to almost.
Well, also it's our job to actually communicate this as well. Okay. So the great thing is that council has expressed interest in it. That's good.
Yeah.
For us, also, they've actually directed us to report back to them on renewal rates on a few things.
Right.
So even paint markings, which has come up. So paint is another one of those things that renewal is kind of like pretty steady. You really need to be repainting the lane lines and the the various markings on a pretty regular basis. So they've asked for a report back on what a steady state renewal looks like for paint.
Right.
So
I remember we talked about this when we did speak early in the spring, just to give the listeners and viewers a context. Like, how much money did we spend the last year on painting sidewalks with yellow strips and roads with the middle strip? Like, how much did you spend on paint?
Oh my gosh, you catch me in like this. It's like, I think it's about, I don't know, a couple $100,000.
A couple $100,000.
Yeah, but we like it right now, and this is why council's asked for a report back on this on a more steady state, because we actually, if you look at what our budget is versus what we spend, those are often different.
Okay.
Because we do have to respond to safety issues. So if a paint marking is gone, and you can't see the stop bar anymore, it has to be done. So paint is one of those areas that we consistently overspend. Yeah. And we just manage within engineering and other areas that we can just allocate from. So the question about what is a steady state number is something that we're reporting back on. And there's a variability within there too. Because, in fact, you could just say, well, let's just continue to renew when it fails, or let's be proactive. And that's usually a better way. It's like the water pipes. I always said, we're going to replace them all anyways. Yeah. Either you replace them as they break, right? Yeah, which is very disruptive,
and nobody likes.
Or you plan ahead, and just say, let's do this, even though it hasn't broken. It's probably going to.
Yeah, that makes sense. So if I coined the term utilitization of our roads would be, I think, a good thing for everybody. But there's got to be some headwinds in front of that, some challenges. Otherwise, I imagine a council would have done it already.
Well, according to, it's money, right? It's going to cost more money, and either that means diverting tax money from other areas, so you'd be cutting back other areas, or it'd mean increasing taxes. Yeah. Or creating a new utility or something like that. It's interesting, my colleague in the city of Calgary, he manages a similar portfolio as me, and he also comes from a transportation background. And he has same revelation that I had, which is like, wow, water and sewer are so easy to figure out. Once you figured it out, it's problem solved. Yeah. Why can't streets do that? What's wrong here? Yeah, so that's okay. It's a thing to be done.
Yeah. Well, I can say that my own personal experience is that the city's very quick to respond in fixing potholes, but I figured out a little trick. You got to tell them it's an area where I ride my bike. If you tell me you ride your bike in that area, or there's people who ride their bikes in this area, then they get to it like I've seen them do it the same day I called in. Yeah, which that one was legitimately, it was because I was riding my bike and it was downtown before I had kids. But so.
And road roughness is actually more of an issue for micromobility, like whether it's e-scooters or bikes or things like that. Right. Small bumps can be quite dangerous.
Sure,
so
they can. Absolutely.
That's why we are responsive to those in bikeways. And if you do bike a lot, you notice that bumps are like really annoying, a lot more annoying than when you're in a car.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we do have a bit of a different standard for the bike facility.
But absolutely. But I would assume, Lon, that there's a lot of upside to just completely redoing these roads. Mm-hmm. Not only does it allow us to modernize these old roads that are in different neighborhoods. I'm going to keep going back to my neighborhood of West Point Grey, because many of those roads don't even have sidewalks. So they're not only not bikeable, they're not even really walkable. And so not only is it a nicer, smoother drive for your car, but also for those who want to bike and walk. Mm-hmm. And then if you get a better pedestrian and bike lanes that can be built out, then you have less cars on the road. Yeah. I remember when we talked last time when I interviewed you, whatever it was, a year or two ago, you told me that there are less cars on our roads today in Vancouver than there were like 40 years ago. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. But it's slower to get from point A to point B because we have just so many more intersections with stoplights. Is that correct? Yeah.
Well, and also pedestrians and bikes. Right. So like the pedestrians create a friction for vehicles turning right and left. And in many parts of our city where there were no pedestrians, those turns were not held up at all.
Right.
And so even though it's only one car, sometimes that one car is blocking all the cars because they're waiting to turn left because they're waiting for someone to cross the crosswalk, right? So pedestrian volumes, that's actually one of the biggest impacts on traffic capacity.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Even though they're crossing when it says walk, you know what I mean? They're doing everything right.
Yeah.
But that's the same time that a vehicle has the opportunity to turn right or left.
Yeah, and they've got to wait. Yeah. I want to talk about the local improvement program that's been in existence in theory, but practically hasn't been enabled because of your budgeting constraints. And before we get into the details, I just want to give the listeners a bit of a parallel. I, for one, believe in the philosophy of a universal healthcare program. Like, I love the idea that as a high-paid taxpayer in this country and province and city, that my tax dollars go so that you and I and Kieran and Reed can all go and show up at the hospital, and we get triaged based on our needs, not based on what we pay in taxes. But the reality is that's not how our system works today. It's so overrun with new immigrants who've come to the country, and that's not trying to say something about immigrants, just the population growth. David Eby talked about that earlier this week when I interviewed him. So the healthcare system has been overburdened with new people. In my opinion, it's also run inefficiently, and there's not enough dollars going into it. And as a result, we have a failing healthcare system. We have, by contrast, private companies like Cambie Surgery who offer private services at a much more efficient rate. And, people up until recently were able to get their healthcare needs taken care of by paying them directly. And then there's this whole debate of like, well, now you're taking, resources out of the public system. So when you and I talked earlier this year, I said, well, like, if the city isn't going to fix my street, can I just pay for it myself? Get my neighbors together, and we'll just pay for it. Because it seems to me like the construction team is available to do it. The resources are there. The trucks are there. It's just, we don't have enough money, so let's just pay for it. Because if I had a choice between paying for it, because I've been in the same neighborhood for 10 years now and nothing's happened, or having to live for another 10 years on these god-awful streets that I drive around, I'd rather pay for it. And you then said, well, we've got a program, but we can't really use it yet because I don't have my end of the budget. So it's a long intro into the local improvement program. So maybe explain to us first, what is the local improvement program? Why hasn't it been utilized in the past decade? And why is it now sound like it's going to now be available to us again?
So long intro. And I can't speak to the health system because I don't know anything about that.
I just want to give
and
a
parallel.
I
don't know if there's any parallels at all.
Yeah, you might not agree with me, but I just want to give a parallel from my mindset. Yeah. So let's not take
the local improvement program was set up as a way to kind of like, I guess, jump the queue, right? Because ultimately, I guess we're going to always deal with the worst situation in the city. So the street that's going to get fixed next year is going to be the worst street in the city. But there are lots of bad streets in the city, of course, and where renewal might be attractive. Other things like new sidewalks, laneway speed humps, traffic calming, traffic circles, we've kind of made those available, lane paving, through a local improvement program. So that's been in place for many, many, many decades. And this allows people to kind of group together. Everyone on their block kind of agrees. What they do is they increase their own taxes to kind of pay for an improvement. And it can be any one of those things: traffic circle, lane paving, lane humps, all of those stuff. The way that it was set up, though, depending on the thing, there was always a city share. So 10% up to 30% based on the thing. So traffic circle versus a new sidewalk versus lane paving. And the challenge with us was that, we would only have about $1 million in the budget for that. And so we couldn't entertain
$1 million. That's it.
For our share.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it wouldn't pay for many improvements across the city.
Right, yeah.
It would kind of run out. And so what we ended up with was this backlog of local improvement requests where they've gone through the process of surveying the neighborhood. They all vote in favor. We kind of go through the whole process, and now they're waiting for our for us to come up with our share.
Yeah.
So that list went from 100 to 200 to 300 to 400
Really?
in the backlog.
Wow.
And so rather than waiting for council to increase our own budget to match those, we've kind of just changed the bylaw. So council just approved this spring. I brought forward a report that just said, let's allow residents to pay 100%.
Great. Did they approve it?
And they approved it.
Oh,
yeah,
fantastic.
So this allows us to now just get through that backlog. And in fact, the demand is probably far greater than that backlog, because those people, when they were kind of coming to us this last year, and we're saying, that's great that you're willing to pay. It'll be about 10 years before we get to your street, in which case they don't go through the process. Right? Because they don't want it 10 years from now.
Yeah.
So the actual demand is probably hundreds and hundreds of additional local improvement requests that we'll get now. So over the next...
You're going to get one for me, that's for sure.
That's great.
I'm going home this weekend. I'm going to knock on my neighbors' doors and say, I got good news.
That's great. So in the next capital plan, we have to prepare for this.
Okay.
Because getting through the backlog is going to be a little bit of an issue. We might have to contract out quite a bit of work, which is also fine.
Yeah.
We have our own crews, but, that's for steady state stuff.
Yeah.
We have to get through a bulge like that. It's better to involve contractors.
Yeah. And under that circumstance, Lon, would the city manage it still? You would procure the outside construction teams.
That's right.
Oversee it all. As the neighbors, as long as I can get my neighbors to all agree, and we all put in our fair share.
Yeah.
Then that's all we have to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it's done.
And so there's. The approach is that it comes off your taxes, or you just pay it up front, or how does that work?
Right now, it's always come as a tax, and the way that it's been is that you can amortize it over 10 years or something like that.
Yeah.
So then it's not that noticeable when it's divided by all the properties and over that period. So that's typically the way it's gone.
Yeah. Okay. I also know in my neighborhood we've been talking about trying to. Forget what the word is that Hydro calls it, but it's when you're taking your power off the power lines and putting them underground. I forget what they have a term for it, but basically, I think they call it undergrounding.
Yeah,
undergrounding the power lines. Is there any coordination in an event like where a neighborhood's going to have a new street paved that there's some undergrounding of the power lines as well?
Yeah, the way that works is with utilities like Hydro or even our own or TELUS or whatever, is there's a cut repair program. So they make the cut and then they have to rectify it. But usually they can do a temporary patch, but then we come along and do the proper repair.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so that it's going to be greater than the extent of the cut itself.
Okay. We're going to talk about electrification, but I do want to say, obviously there's been a big push in, electrifying our mobility, so electric vehicles. Has this had any impact on road improvements or in road planning?
Not to a large extent. I mean, the shift to electrification on the vehicle front is quite dramatic and happening fast in our region in particular. I think.
And when you say shift, what do you mean? Do you mean going to
electric vehicles?
Okay.
Yeah. So if you look at new vehicle sales now, I think we're at 25% electric.
Yeah.
That adoption rate is higher than anywhere else in North America by a long shot. So this particular region is embracing electric vehicles quite seriously.
Yeah.
And for us, that puts us in the North American context. That puts us at the forefront of this in many respects. So many of these cities, other cities like Calgary and Edmonton, Montreal, San Francisco, will get to our situation, but they're not there yet.
Right.
If you know what I mean.
So we're really leading the
charge on this.
Yeah.
And there's a couple consequences for us on that. On the actual street maintenance side, the biggest challenge is actually the loss in revenue from fuel tax. So the TransLink's feeling it right now because they have 17 cents a liter on fuel tax, and of course, TransLink is in a funding crisis because that revenue stream is shrinking year by year, and the demand for transit is growing. But a lot of money that we get actually is from TransLink as well for our street improvements. We have a cost-sharing agreement with TransLink. They maintain all of the arterial streets. The major road network is funded through TransLink.
Okay.
So like Broadway and 41st Avenue, Granville, Oak, it's all money from TransLink through gas tax that's transferred from the federal government.
Okay.
So it has me worried, from that perspective, because I don't see the replacement revenue stream to support the roads. So in terms of the actual road, I mean, they're heavier vehicles. Heavier vehicles do cause more damage, but that's.
But I guess
significant.
they don't. Okay.
I mean,
I guess the benefit is they don't drip oil and.
That's right. I mean, it's the same with a bus. So a bus does a lot of damage on a street.
Right.
Doesn't mean we shouldn't run buses.
Right.
Because they're really, really important. They move more people than cars. So, yeah.
As I mentioned to you, we've recently launched an EV charging company, and one of the observations I've had is you really only need for a sort of standard level 2 charger, which will currently charge anywhere from a low of 5 or 6 kilowatt an hour to upwards of maybe like 10, something like that. One charger should be able to support about 7 or 8 vehicles. That's why our growing area, we see a lot of opportunity is in multi-residential family buildings. But I also look at areas like the area I live in, where a lot of people drive electric vehicles, and every one of us has our own charger in our garage. But now with this switch to a lot of when homes are being redeveloped, there's no parking at all because there's laneway homes, or now we can put 4, in some cases even 6 plexes up. I wonder how we're going to address that. And to me, the most logical thing, and I've seen this happening in other parts of the world, is street side charging, right? Where you can have you've got a sidewalk and you've got a little strip of grass, and then you've got the road with the cars parked on the road. Just like you'd have, parking meters, you could actually have little charging stations. Is this being entertained at all by the city? Absolutely.
So we do have a number of those installed in the downtown. On Homer Street, right by BC Hydro, they paid for that.
Yeah, they've got that one.
And then they're expanding that. They're doubling the size of it because they're doing the other side of the street, all the parking spaces there. And then over in Yaletown, next to Yaletown Park.
Yeah, those are the charge point ones.
Some it's good to find locations where the business might not be too impacted.
Right.
A lot of businesses want to have the activity in front of their business related to their business, as opposed to.
But I'm talking more about in residential areas where.
In residential areas,
where you've got so single family detached homes. Like I'll pick an area like in the Point Grey area. You've got these massive blocks of homes, and almost every time a new house is built now, there's a laneway home or 2 being put on the back, and now there even be more under this new legislation.
Yep.
And so you've got more people living there with less parking availability because a lot of these people just they can't park on their own property, so they're going to park on the street. And switching over from a gas to electric car, I just think we should be having charging along those streets.
Yeah, and in fact, we allow third-party energy providers or electricity providers to use city streets to do exactly that.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's something that anyone can pursue.
Okay.
And we have had providers like BC Hydro, but also others that are doing exactly that. In parks too. So in parks and on streets.
Okay.
The city of Vancouver also manages a whole bunch of parking lots, which also need to do the same thing.
Yeah.
So because Easy Park is owned by the city, but it operates as an independent corporation.
Yeah.
I actually sit on the board. But they're required under the new bylaws to install EV charging.
Yeah, it's roughly about 4 chargers if you have at least 60 parking stalls.
In all their parkades, that's right. And so that's kind of coming due in the next year.
Yeah,
so they'll be scrambling to do that deployment.
Yeah. Lon, we've pretty much gotten into this second last topic of electrification. When I got a chance to interview Matt Horn, one of your colleagues from City of Vancouver, back when we started Coastal Front, like 5 years ago, and you think about how much things have changed in the last 5 years, one of the things that he brought to my attention is that there's 2 opportunities for the city to improve its sort of carbon footprint. One of the obvious ones is as the vehicle fleets within the city start to age and get moved out and replaced, we replace them with electric vehicles. So maybe if you could talk at a high level whether that's happening. And the second is about the buildings, because a lot of the city's buildings are still run off of natural gas or diesel, and switching them to electric heat pump seems to be a logical step. Can you maybe speak a little bit about the pollution that the city itself is causing through its buildings and its fleets of vehicles, and how that's being addressed?
Yeah, so greenhouse gas reduction from corporate activities has been a number one issue for us. In fact, we want to be the leader. So we have to be the role model of this. And so our own fleets, switching to electric, but also using biodiesel in some of our equipment. There's not an electric option out there,
right?
And so, but we are able to use biodiesel, which is from fish guts or something, wherever that biodiesel comes from. Yeah. And then we also have a number of operations that take our own business, like the landfill, for example, the methane gas that comes off of that, capturing that. And we had over a number of years been selling it to nearby greenhouses for heating. But we have a partnership with Fortis, and it's almost complete. It's actually going to be completed in the next month or so, where they capture the greenhouse gas or the methane gas and put it into their own system.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Our total corporate activities on GHG reduction has been dramatic. I don't know if Matt shared it with you, but it's way ahead of where we need to be.
I'm sure he did, but
community.
It's been a long time.
Yeah. So corporate emissions are on I can't remember, we're at 40% reduction or something like that.
Wow.
And
we'll really made a lot of progress there.
Yeah. And again, like you say, we have buildings. That's great. We switched to heat pumps. We become more efficient about that. We have vehicles. Those are the two things that are the big ones. And then these oddball operations we have, like the landfill, is an opportunity. District energy system is also an opportunity. So that's transitioning to a carbon neutral energy system. We take I don't know if you know, we take the heat from the sewer and we pump it back to the houses and buildings for heating water and space.
We do that now?
Yep.
Oh, wow.
It's a really innovative.
That is innovative. Yeah. Wow, that's
so
great.
There's two big heat pumps right under the Canby Bridge at the south end. You see those four stacks that stick up?
Oh, yeah.
That's a heat pump underneath the bridge, and it goes into one of our biggest sewers.
Really?
It pulls the heat out. Yeah.
Wow. Oh, that's fantastic.
And what's cool about that too is that the sewer runs hottest when people need it the most. So
right.
When in the morning when everyone's having a hot shower, the sewer runs pretty hot.
Okay.
So we're kind of taking that heat energy and sending it right back to the building to heat the water for the next shower.
When was that built?
We built it just in time for the Olympics.
Okay.
So we're kind of trying to have the Olympic Village be a model sustainable community. Yeah. Have the lowest GHG per capita of any neighborhood in the world.
Yeah.
That was the goal. And part of that was actually a district energy system like this.
Yeah.
Because heating water and heating air is actually one of those high energy activities.
Yeah, great. A question around geothermal. Is there any activity? Is there anything that the city's pursuing there?
We are, when we're looking at our neighborhood, our district energy system, and we're looking for new sources of energy, because we're just installing the second heat pump right now, which actually exhausts the amount of megawatts of energy that's in that sewer.
Yeah.
So we are looking to other sources of heat, and deep geothermal is actually one of them.
Okay.
It's something that right now it doesn't feel like the timing is right, because we don't feel like there's been enough experience on it, and we don't want to be the experimenter.
Yeah.
And we have a few other potential energy sources in play, and another sewer pipe that we can kind of reach out to over by VCC, the community college over by VCC Clark Station. Anyway, so that's something that very much on our radar, but not something we're pursuing immediately right now.
Okay.
It's definitely there.
Okay, good. I'd also like to talk to you about BIAs, Business Improvement Associations. How many do we have in Vancouver?
22.
22. And so just for the listeners and viewers to understand what these are associations that represent the businesses in different areas. So you might have I assume one would be in Commercial Drive area.
Yep. Commercial Drive.
Commercial Drive. We know with the Downtown Vancouver Business Association.
Yeah, in downtown there is also Gastown, Chinatown,
yeah.
Yaletown, Robson Street, and the West End.
Right.
The West End covers Lower Robson, Davie, and Denman.
Is it fair to say then, Lon, that if you think about your neighborhoods that you live in or you go to visit, each one of them has a BIA?
Pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah. There's only a few missing spots in the city where there's a real business concentration and no BIA. And oddly enough, the one that stands out is Central Broadway.
Central Broadway.
It doesn't have a BIA.
Really?
Yeah, right where my office is.
Yeah.
At Canby and Broadway. That's a really busy business district, and it has no BIA.
Yeah.
Very odd. I don't know why.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little about why these are important. And it seems from what you've told me that this current mayor and council have really gotten a lot more involved in engaging with the BIAs and why they're important in the work you're doing with them.
Well, they really help us help them in a sense that they bring together their businesses. They elect their own president and their representatives on their boards. They tax themselves, and then they have money. So they kind of tax their own group, and then that's their money to do with it, right? So they can choose to put up hanging flower baskets or banners or, planters that sit on the ground, new furniture, whatever they want to do, right?
Yeah.
They can hire, DVBIA hires their own cleanup crews, that supplement the cleanup that we do on the streets, because they want a higher level of cleanliness.
Right.
So for us, having a coordinated association like that, it just is a game changer for us dealing with the business district and looking at how we can help them. This council has been particularly interested. They were very concerned. I mean, we just came out of the pandemic. And it was a very hard time for street fronting retail in our city. And these business districts suffered quite a bit. And having like that whole period, those years when we had shop fronts closed, you didn't have the shopkeeper even caring for the sidewalk in front, and the basics were kind of falling apart.
Yeah.
And so I think this council kind of recognizing as we're kind of pulling ourselves out of the pandemic into the new years is that a little bit more care and attention to support these business districts and help them thrive has kind of been there. So their first focus was on Chinatown. They called it Uplifting Chinatown. Then on the paver repairs in Gastown. So we've been doing that and working in lanes. There's lots of work underway in Gastown. But then as part of the midterm capital plan update, they actually sent a bunch of money to another fund. I think it was about 8 to 10 million on what they call Uplifting Communities Fund. So kind of recognizing they felt that what we had done in Chinatown was a success, and the businesses there felt it.
Yeah.
They thought, well, let's do that in other places.
Yeah.
And so we're taking that additional funds, and sometimes this is sidewalk renewal or pole painting or something. And for every business district, it's kind of a different answer, right? What is the thing that's wrong with your street or that needs fixing? And we're pairing that with other programs that they've already approved, like we had all these temporary plazas that went in during the pandemic and so we were doing temporary to permanent plazas.
Okay.
One under construction right now at Robson and Butte.
Okay.
If you've been up there, go have a walk. It's a big project. It's totally going to change the street.
Wow.
Because it's also through the intersection. There's plaza on both sides, and the parking lane is gone. So the street is just one lane in each direction and huge sidewalks. And then we have kind of widening sidewalks on Davie Street. We have plazas going in South Granville, Canby Street, Main Street, in Mount Pleasant area, Hastings Sunrise. Big work going in Punjabi Village. So we're kind of taking that funding and kind of matching it up with stuff that we were kind of doing anyways.
And are you the ultimate decision maker on that, but you engage with the BIAs so that they have a lot of say?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, in fact, there was some probing.
Really...
It was the mayor's motion. There was some probing from councillors about, well, what neighborhoods, where should it go? And his answer was, I'm going to let the city engineer and the city manager decide. So it's like, it's us. But of course, we're not going to do anything that the BIA doesn't want. Right. So we're always going to have that good conversation with the BIA to say, we see this, is this what you need, or come to us and we can see what we can do.
And what's the feedback been by these BIAs since this has been initiated?
Great. In fact, I would say Pavements to Plaza is a really good example where, in the old program, who knows, you might wait 80 years before we'd come and make that temporary closure permanent.
Yeah.
We said, well, look, if we do this really quick and simple, are you in favor with that? I was like, absolutely. Yeah, they were really keen on it. So, yeah, it's kind of nice to be able to do this. And in fact, we have a couple of other big projects.
So it seems like a win all around.
It is. And then, so the Broadway subway is under construction too, which has, torn up Broadway in a couple of key business districts, right?
Yeah.
Including Mount Pleasant, South Canby, South Granville, Fairview, and Arbutus.
Yeah.
When that station is built, we're going to rebuild the Broadway, with a whole new look, right?
Yeah.
And so there's going to
that'd be great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have an idea for you
that
I wanted to talk about with respect to these BIAs and parking, because parking's under your domain, correct? Mm-hmm. So my observation has been there's certain neighborhoods have really struggled to, especially post-pandemic, struggle to kind of keep themselves open for business. And the one I'll highlight is 10th Avenue Village. They lost the Safeway, which was the kind of anchor, draw. And in the 11 years that I've lived in that neighborhood, I've seen, when we moved in 11 years ago, I would say the vacancy rate amongst the sort of storefront commercial properties was maybe 15% at the most. Now it's got to be at least 50. I mean, it's like every second store there's something shut down.
Yeah.
And yet I got to pay for parking when I'm on these streets, right? So here's my genius idea. Why not engage with the BIAs and let them decide what the parking rate is for whatever their area is? And so logically, if I'm the downtown Vancouver Business Association, I'm going to want to have a high rate of parking because I know there's enough people coming downtown that someone's going to pay, $7 an hour to park on the street out just off Robson or just off Alberni, right? By contrast, if I've got my business in a neighborhood like West 10th, and I'm like, man, I don't care about parking parking rates. I'd rather have people not pay for parking so they'll just come to my store. And obviously that kind of free market mentality, especially if you give them a little bit of the parking rate, right? So if I'm a shop owner in West 10th, I might say, if let's say it's just for simple math, let's say it's 10% of whatever the parking rates are, we'll give you 10%. Well, if I'm in business, if I'm in West 10th, and I'm like, I don't need 10% of a couple dollars. What I need is a couple $100 being spent in my store. So make the parking free, draws more people in. And then by contrast, if you're in a neighborhood where you already, Kerrisdale Village is just hopping constantly. I mean, the parking there should be 3-4 times what it is. And those shop owners can kind of like, under the BIAs, can ratchet up and say, and then it's a win for everybody. The only person that's kind of paying more is the people who are parking, but there's already enough people there that they'll still stay. And you kind of find this perfect equilibrium.
Yeah. I love that you brought up the conversation of parking.
Yeah.
Because it's the best topic ever. The parking rates actually were always a real challenge for us across the city. For all the years that we've been managing pay parking, up until just before the pandemic, I think it was like 2018 or so, up until then, we had to go to council to change the parking rates or institute new parking meters or whatever. We had to get approval on all of that.
Okay.
It didn't allow us to be very responsive in terms of adjustments that are needed on a dynamic city where, something that just got popular now, parking is a problem or whatever. It didn't, but also it brought politics to the conversation in a way that, because of course, everyone wants to set the rate, or they want to have control until they do have control, and then they don't want it because everyone will complain either way. So what we did was we created a bylaw, and the bylaw directs staff, like for us, to monitor block faces of all of the busy well-parked streets in the business districts across the city. And what we have to do, the bylaw directs us to increase parking rates if it's over 85% parked and decrease parking rates if it's under 60% parked per hour. We have a daytime rate and an evening rate. So they can be different, you
Yeah.
know, and it kind of acknowledges that places like the downtown in this area here, it's actually quite popular in the daytime, but not so popular in the evening. So you can have a low rate in the evening because there's no demand. So that had been in place for a couple of years, and it was fantastic because we were seeing the rates change all across the city in a very dynamic fashion. In this area, you know, where we have, like just over there, we have some of the highest rates at like $10 an hour.
Yeah.
But the evening demand wasn't anywhere near $10 an hour. So year by year, the evening rate was dropping off, which is good for the restaurants and business, or like people that are like needing to be there in the evening. Pandemic hits. Okay, now none of this makes sense. So we kind of suspend operations for a bit. Then we come back, and now I'm noticing some oddnesses within our system.
Yeah.
So the bylaw is a good one, but probably needs some tweaking. And it actually came out when council directed us to do this uplifting Chinatown thing, just because businesses kind of noticed this $4 an hour. Like, why do I have to pay $4,000 or $4 an hour? But oddly enough, you would go to the next block and it was only $1 an hour.
Right.
And that's because that's the block that everyone wants to park on. Right. So, but the theory behind the rate was that people would somehow know that, right, and go to the block that's only $1 an hour, and so we'd spread the demand.
Yeah.
Right. But of course,
Does that happen or no?
If they don't know before they park,
Right.
how are they going to know?
Right. Good point.
So I could see this problem, and it happens in a number of areas of the city where there's a 100% block that's the most popular, that we could be raising that by $1 an hour every year for the next 10 years, and people still not know that around the corner they can park for $1 an hour.
Right.
So we started a different process, which was in Chinatown. We said, well, let's even them out.
Okay.
So it's like $2 an hour for the whole area. And it kind of more reflective of the fact that if that person can't park on that block, they'll park on the next block.
Right.
So as a result of the learnings from that, we're going to be reporting back to council and modernizing this. What it also has to do, which wasn't built into the bylaw, was that when the parking demand drops below a certain rate, it should be zero.
Yeah.
So
like West 10th.
In the evening, say in some areas where there just isn't demand, our bylaw didn't allow it to go to zero.
Yeah.
Right? Or in the daytime where things changed, like a Safeway, a grocery store, which was a huge anchor for that neighborhood, closed. You know, the demand disappeared. And our bylaw doesn't allow it to go to zero, right? So that's another one.
Yeah,
that,
it'd be nice to see that get changed.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know any of these shop owners other than my wife and I try and shop in that area just to kind of help do our small part to keep those businesses alive. But I'm sure they'd appreciate if the cost of, and in that neighborhood is also really interesting because the side streets it's free parking.
Yeah.
So what also happens is people, when they do go to park,
they park on the side street.
Yeah, which is like where the homes are.
Right.
But it's like a half block walk, and you park for free. And actually, the parking rate up there in particular is not that expensive. I think the big concern is someone has is they go into, go to a restaurant or get a haircut, and they've paid for half an hour parking, and then they forget, and the next thing you know, they're getting a $40 ticket, right? And that's the big reason why it's not the parking rate; it's just the penalty of getting a ticket. Yeah. So I do think that there needs to be some more.
They should get that alert and do pay by phone so that it tells them, so that they know that they should extend their time.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping to bring that report to council before the end of the year.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, great. Lon, this has been a really great conversation. Before we wrap it up, is there anything else that most of our listeners are in Metro Vancouver. In fact, the majority of them are actual Vancouver residents living in the city, working in the city. Is there anything else that you'd like people to know about that is kind of a hot file for you, something you're working on over the next 12 months that we can anticipate coming?
Well, the kind of, I could think one of the big exciting projects, actually, the Granville Bridge.
Okay. Talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, because, we've been retrofitting it, the north end. We've been kind of removing the loops and building a new street network. I'm sorry for all the delay for everyone. Construction is always a tough thing, like at Oak and 70th, where we'd be doing that sewer replacement. These are not easy, but there's a light at the end of the tunnel for the Granville Bridge. We're hoping to complete, majority complete by the end of this year, but really open for real business for walking and cycling over it in the new year. That's going to be a bit of a game changer, I think, for the city, just because The Arbutus Greenway is actually one of these really great walking and cycling routes, much like the seawall is.
Yeah.
You can go for long stretches of the city without any interact with traffic, and it ends right at the Granville Bridge,
Yes.
right at Fir and Fifth.
Yeah.
So this will allow you to kind of continue on that bike or walking
great.
journey on a really big space on the bridge. So on the bridge itself, we're going from 8 lanes to 6 lanes.
Okay.
Which is still plenty of space for the traffic.
Yeah. That bridge didn't need that many lanes. Yeah.
But it'd be a big, comfortable space for walking and cycling. And then on the downtown side to kind of fix up that area at the, the Granville Pacific intersection there, where the Vancouver House is and the university, to kind of create these really great walking and cycling connections. I think that's going to be really cool.
Great. And so we can anticipate that being finalized in the first quarter of next year, maybe?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Lon LaClaire, General Manager of Engineering Services of the City of Vancouver, thank you for being on Coastal Front again today. We got a chance to talk about exciting topics such as business improvement associations, electrification, road maintenance, and my favorite topic about sewers. It's always a good topic. Thanks for coming on the show today, and thanks for all the good work you and your team do at the City of Vancouver.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks.